What were the largest ships of the Separatists? Why were those dropships from episode 1 so terrifying? And wait, what is that? We look at all of this and more today in this 50 facts video about the Separatist spaceships. The Separatists are a very interesting faction in Star Wars. Within a few years, a whole new faction emerged in the galaxy, fueled by a mixture of star systems dissatisfied with the ruling regime, huge mega-corporations eager for even more profit, and secret Sith forces in the background trying to control everything. This ultimately also played a role in the Separatists' fleet formation and ship selection. The member was that the Separatists founded brought their own ships, fleets, and ship production to the table. But these large mega-corporations also had their own ships, which they had produced years before and could now use to defend the Separatists. Such as, among others, the Trade Federation's large LUCREHULK ships. As the Trade Federation's name suggests, the Trade Federation was also responsible for a large portion of trade in many parts of the galaxy. Accordingly, it also owned many very large cargo ships, such as the LUCREHULK freighters. These were ships measuring 3,170 meters in diameter and were capable of transporting up to 25 million tons of cargo. With such a huge amount of cargo and the vastness of space, other uninvited guests were naturally not far away. And to protect themselves from pirates, the LUCREHULKs were armed with 28 laser cannons, distributed all around the hull. Before the Clone Wars and the founding of the Separatists, this was enough firepower to keep several starfighters or even corvettes from pirate gangs at bay. When the Trade Federation co-founded the Separatists, it quickly became clear that they needed not just lightly armed freighters, but proper heavy warships. Freighters to transport weapons and goods, but also battleships and fighter carriers. Building all of these would be extremely expensive, which is why the LUCREHULKs came back into play. Under the Republic, ships were only allowed to have a limited number of weapons installed to prevent military uprising. But the Trade Federation had built the LUCREHULKs from the start to be easily modified, and so these freighters quickly became enormous warships. Thousands of them to be exact, since the Trade Federation already had a lot of them anyway. Where previously there had only been 28 laser cannons on the hulls, some of these versions were equipped with a good 50 turbo lasers, 472 laser cannons, and 164 point defense cannons. Enough armament to even take on the Republic's truly large ships. However, this also meant reducing the cargo capacity of these ships. Depending on the variant, it was only around 5 million tons, but they still carried 1,500 starfighters and 50 dropships. That sounds like a huge armament, especially considering that the Republic's Venator Star Destroyer only had 10 turbolasers, 4 heavy proton torpedo launchers, and a little bit of point defense. But you also have to keep in mind that the LUCREHULK's weapons were mounted completely around its round hull. On top, on the bottom, on all the sides, and partly on the side of its arms. This allowed the LUCREHULK to be defensible in all directions, and against a swarm of small, lightly armored targets, the LUCREHULK was very well equipped. The advantage the Republic Star Destroyers had over the LUCREHULK was that, thanks to their wedge shape, they could aim all of their weapons at one single target simultaneously. While a LUCREHULK had around 50 turbolasers, it could perhaps aim a maximum of 10 at one single target at once. Some of these LUCREHULKs could even split into two parts. Some were modified so that the inner sphere could detach from the rest of the ship and fly on its own. This offered a variety of options for the Separatists. On one hand, this allowed more cargo to be transported to the ground more quickly. Instead of just sending landing craft, a core ship could land on its own and unload its stowed cargo quite quickly. On the other hand, these core ships could also function as independent small ships, allowing them to respond more flexibly to situations. For example, they could also act as tankers for a larger fleet on their own, without adding an entire LUCREHULK to the fleet. Their diameter was 696 meters and they were equipped with 301 point defense cannons, 48 attack laser cannons as well as 3 turbo lasers. Good for defending against fighters, but not much more than that. But the Separatists didn't just have the Trade Federation and the LUCREHULKs as ships. Their fleets were much more diverse. A significantly smaller ship was the Diamond-class cruiser. At just 200 meters long, it was still only armed with 2 laser cannons, which was ridiculously weak for a ship of that size, even at that time. Other ships, like the Republic's Consular-class cruiser, were significantly better armed. This ship, just 115 meters long, was equipped with 4 turbolasers and 2 missile launchers. But the Diamond-class cruisers weren't designed for ship-to-ship combat. At most, they were good for defending against individual starfighters. Instead, they were excellent transporters for the Commerce Guild. Even before the Clone Wars, the Commerce Guild used various types of spider droids to protect its planets. And thanks to these diamond cruisers, could even transport entire armies of such droids to foreign planets. Such ships are said to have accommodated 600 large spider droids and 2,400 small dwarf spider droids. We know that the Commerce Guild was present on Geonosis with these diamond cruisers. Legend sources give us a figure of more than 40 of these, that are said to have transported battle droids and Commerce Guild higher-ups. This alone would mean that the Commerce Guild transported at least 24,000 spider droids as well as 96,000 dwarf spider droids to Geonosis, with just a really small flotilla of Diamond-class cruisers. This clearly illustrates one of the Separatist strengths. While the Republic had to transport living beings on its ships, let's say personnel from the Planetary Defense Forces or clones, the Separatists could in many cases design their ships entirely around droids. Certain areas of these ships potentially didn't even require life support systems. Only a minimum of food and water needed to be transported for a small crew, which made room for more droids. Droids that could sometimes be folded even smaller for transport. This meant that the Separatists could often transport significantly more battle droids, vehicles and starfighters with their cargo ships than the Republic could. These Diamond-class cruisers have only appeared in Episode 2 so far. There they are mainly seen parked on Geonosis, but they can now also be seen in the Battle of Coruscant. However, only in the Star Tours attraction at Disneyland, where you can fly through the Battle of Coruscant and get very close to these Diamond-class cruisers. It wasn't just the Commerce Guild and the Trade Federation that had transporters. The Techno Union also built its own transporters, which were even better suited for war. The 220-meter-long hard cell transporters were used by both the Techno Union and the anti-galactic banking clan. They were armed with 5 laser cannons and 2 assault missile launchers, a perfectly capable armament for transports of their size. These ships did not utilize repulsor technology at all. While other ships switched off their engines in the atmosphere and during takeoff and landing, allowing the repulsor lifts to take over, the hard cells were simply giant rockets. Multiple rocket engines lifted these large ships off planets and also provided their full acceleration in space. This ensured that these ships could take off from planets very quickly. However, in space they were rather slow compared to other ships of their size. Since these ships had to be landed upright, thanks to their rockets, the decks of the ships were also arranged in this orientation. This also allowed for a very clear division of the ships. A handful of upper decks were pressurized, so much so that even the Skakuan crew who mostly flew these ships could remove their masks. The rest of the ship was intended for droids and ammunition only, so it didn't really need an atmosphere during the spaceflight. These ships had enough space for 650 Hailfire droids and plenty of missile ammunition. The Separatists had a few other transports and dropships, but let's continue with the larger, more powerful ships for now and come back to 1 or 2 of these transports later. One ship that was definitely entirely designed for combat was the Munificent class frigate. Mainly used by the intergalactic banking clan, They used frigates even before the Clone Wars to protect their own empires in super rich worlds. These 825-meter-long ships were also more than well armed. They had 2 heavy turbolaser cannons, 2 long-range ion cannons, 26 light twin turbolaser cannons, 20 light turbolaser cannon turrets, 38 point defense lasers, and 8 medium anti-aircraft cannons. Armament powerful enough to more than keep up with many other ships of their size. The 2 heavy turbolaser cannons in particular were said to have been powerful enough to collapse even the shields of powerful space stations in just a few shots. During the Clone Wars, these Munificent Frigates could also be used to transport battle droids. One frigate alone had space for 150,000 deactivated battle droids, presumably B-1 battle droids. And depending on the model, 12 to 36 starfighters could dock with them. Now, I've already said that the Banking Clan used these frigates primarily to defend their own wealthy worlds. And that's true, but that's not all of it. The Banking Clan controlled several so-called treasure worlds, which contained so much wealth that they could probably finance several other star systems if they were exploited. Such planets, therefore, had to be well protected. But the Banking Clan also used the frigates for other purposes, especially before the Clone Wars. Among other things, they were used to haul transmitters across the galaxy, which were supposed to enable uninterrupted bank transfers everywhere. But they were also used to occasionally appear on planets that were apparently a bit late in paying off their debts to the Banking Clan. Similar to the Munificent class, the Requisant class was also a pure warship for the Separatists. In Legends, this ship was actually designed by Mod Calamari engineers. However, the details were then stolen by rival Quarren and passed on to the Separatists. This allowed many different shipyards from systems newly joined to the Separatists to build these ships and sponsor the Separatists' fleet. The Techno Union provided the money and know-how, while the Commerce Guild delivered the raw materials for the construction of hundreds to thousands of these ships on various planets. This meant that the Separatists already possessed a very large number of Requisant destroyers at the start of the Clone Wars. This probably didn't please the Republic, because these 1,187-meter-long ships were equipped with 5 heavy turbolasers, 6 heavy turbolaser turrets, 5 turbolaser cannons, and 92 dual-point defense lasers. There was also a significantly larger version of these ships with a length of 2,544 meters. The armament, however, seemed to remain the same. Whether this has meant that the weapons became more powerful is unknown, but the larger version could accommodate landing shuttles in a hangar, something the smaller version could not. While many Separatist ships were piloted either by real living beings or external droids, these Requisent Cruisers were controlled by a built-in droid brain. The entire kilometer-long ship was essentially a giant droid. This kept the crew size down, but it also had its drawbacks. The ship's reaction time was extremely slow, and often these ships were seemingly completely stubborn. Even under changing battle conditions, these Requisent Cruisers would stick to a predetermined target and continue attacking it. This sometimes even went so far as to ram into their target and be destroyed in the process. And to be used effectively, these Requisant destroyers were almost always deployed in larger groups. 4 to 6 of these were said to have been enough to destroy one Venator Star Destroyer. This here was a Separatist cruiser, a warship several hundred meters long, armed with 6 capital ship turrets and 11 heavy anti-starfighter lasers. Ships of this class could carry a total of 12 starfighters. The design of these ships is incredibly interesting, but unfortunately they have only really appeared in the video game Jedi Starfighters, and the information about them is also very limited. We know almost nothing about them. Together with the Separatist frigates, they were used by mercenaries of Separatist Squadron. Therefore, it is also possible that the ship design actually has a completely different name, and these ships are only called Separatist because the mercenaries have that name. Since these mercenaries were hired by Dooku to increase the Separatist defenses and went into battle with a fairly large fleet to fight against the Republic, they can be considered Separatist ships. The DH Omni support ship, however, was quite common among the Separatists and was perhaps one of the most important ships in the Separatist fleet. This nearly 910 meter long vessel kept the war machine of the Separatists afloat. Originally, this class was also used by corporations throughout the galaxy. During the Clone Wars, it became the Separatists' primary supply vehicle. These ships could transport a total of almost 5 million tons. That's roughly the same amount as the various upgraded LUCREHULK variants. This made these Omni support ships perfect for transporting cargo from ship to ship, as well as from ship to planet. This allowed supplies, food, maintenance parts, as well as droids and vehicles to be transported to planets without endangering the large, expensive warships. Although these support ships were also armed with a few point defense lasers, they otherwise had to rely on the fleet for protection. On a smaller scale, the Separatists also used the C-9979 dropships. These 210 meter long ships were longer than many corvettes of the time, but were primarily designed to transport cargo, troops, vehicles, or even starfighters. For self-defense, they were armed with 4 laser cannons and 4 laser cannon turrets, so they were no threat to other ships of their size, let alone larger ones, but they weren't meant to be. They could carry 153 vehicles such as MTTs or PACs and around 2,500 battle droids. It's unclear whether this includes the battle droids already carried in over 100 MTTs or whether they can be counted in addition to that. And of course, this only applies to the landing variant. There was also a fighter-carrying variant of these. They could carry 144 starfighters, the same number as an Executor-class Superstar Destroyer more than 18 kilometers longer could carry years later. These dropships were also designed so that almost the entire interior could be used as cargo space, and from the second they landed, even the first heavily armored vehicles could float down the loading ramp of these dropships, making their deployment extremely efficient. Even smaller but more aggressive were the Drog-class boarding craft. Just 18.5 meters long, these ships were equipped with 4 twin turbolaser cannons, but they weren't actually intended for combat. They were designed for boarding other ships. With long claws, they could dig into a ship's armor and thus secure themselves. Then, with a plasma cutter, they could cut through the ship's hull and transport up to 6 passengers into an enemy ship. 6 passengers doesn't sound like much at first, but these drug boarding craft were often deployed in large numbers. And while these 6 occupants were perhaps not B1 battle droids, but specialized elite battle droids or Sith assassins, even a few of these drug boarding ships could be very dangerous even for large capital ships. The Bulwark battleships were designed more specifically for combat. 1,000 meter long battleships that the Techno Union was actually supposed to build as pure warships. We know that in Legends they were built in the shipyards on the Republic besieged planet Ferost. After years of upgrading and waiting, they broke through the blockade with a large wave of ships, dragging a fairly large Republic fleet into a cat-and-mouse chase across the galaxy. Like some other factions, the Separatists also used various civilian ship models that they converted for war. These included the Providence Cruisers. These ships were very versatile and could therefore also be used as cargo ships or for fighter defense. At 480 meters long, many ships of this class were equipped with 4 laser cannons, 2 quad laser cannon turrets, and 1 proton torpedo launcher. The really big players, however, were the Providence-class destroyers and carriers. Like the Recusant classes, they came in 2 different sizes. Once again designed by Quarren engineers who wanted to provide counterparts to Mon Calamari designs. These Providence-class ships were intended to be among the largest of the Separatists. And the Quarren came up with a pretty good design here. It was quite inexpensive to build and highly modular, which allowed the Providence class to take on a wide variety of roles. But this class was primarily used as battleships and carriers. The smaller 1088 meter long variant was equipped with 14 quad turbo lasers, 34 point defense laser cannons, 12 point defense ion cannons, 2 heavy ion cannons, as well as 102 proton torpedo launchers. These ships could also carry up to 240 starfighters. It is said that a single one of these ships, presumably the longer 2,177 meter long variant, could hold an entire planet in check. However, there were also full-scale carrier configurations. We don't know the exact numbers, but they seem to have been less heavily armed, but equipped with significantly more fighters. By far the largest and most powerful Separatist ship was the Subjugator class. Once again a ship built by Quarren engineers above the Quarren world of Permant. With a length of 4,845 meters, it was surpassed only by the Republic's large Mandator class dreadnoughts. Ships of this class were armed with 500 dual turbolasers, ion cannons, 400 point-defense twin laser cannons and 2 mega ion cannons, one on each side. These ion cannons were capable of completely disabling multiple ships simultaneously. This made them easy prey, easily destroyed or even boarded. The hangar capacity of the ship class was also enormous. The ship is said to have housed over 200 droid starfighters. On the other hand, the number of battle droids on board at just 60,000 was rather low for a ship of this size. Of course, we know the Malevolence as a ship of this class, but it wasn't the only one. Legend sources speak of at least 5 ships of this class, but even in canon the Separatists are said to have had other Subjugator class ships. After the Malevolence's disaster, however, they were mostly put into the reserve. In Legends, however, there was also a sister ship to the Malevolence, which was also said to belong to the Subjugator class, the Devastation. But calling it a sister ship is a bit of a stretch. Not only was the Devastation at almost 8 kilometers long, almost twice as long as the Malevolence, it wasn't even equipped with 2 normal mega ion cannons like the Malevolence, but with 4 crystal-powered ion pulse cannons. 2 to the side, 1 facing forward. These not only deactivated electrical systems, they could also tear apart entire spaceships or even space stations. Some said they could even completely destroy small planets with one of their shots. But the Devastation could also be destroyed quite quickly by a Jedi strike force. What do you think of the Separatist ships? Leave a comment down below. And if you want to learn more about Imperial ships, check out the linked 50 facts video in the end card. I wish you all a wonderful day and may the Force be with you.